Okay, so welcome. Here we have a really nice person who's going to tell something about really nice names that I cannot pronounce. So maybe you will do it better. And we will be hearing about a saga that is called
Bjarnar saga Hítdælakappa.
Yeah, I thought about it. Yeah, my point exactly. And it's a part of Daria's PhD thesis, and it evolved from her master, actually, that she made in Iceland. So yeah, welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Well, I came here today not with something solid and complete, but actually was looking for an advice. So it would be really nice to get any feedback from you. And yes, as it has been said, I started this project in my master's thesis in University of Iceland. So I have been working with Bjarnar saga for more than 2 years now, and it still remains a mystery to me. So, and digital stylometry is one of the approaches that I decided to use to kind of crack the mystery a little bit. So I was curious to experiment and to see what Stylo can show me, and maybe something interesting would come up. So today I want to present the story of my adventures in this field, and I will start from the description of Bjarnar saga itself a little bit, so you know the field where we're going into. Then I will talk a little bit about my reasons why would I use Stylo at all in this case, and then I will proceed to different kinds of experiments that I did. And then we'll talk a little bit about what could be done in the future and what kind of questions this project put me in front of. Okay, so a very short introduction into Bjarnar saga Hítdælakappa. It's one of the Icelandic sagas, one of the sagas of Icelanders, Íslendingasögur. They were written somewhere around 13th century, but well, we don't know for sure, as with any kind of medieval stuff, we never know. They probably were circulating in some oral form before they were written. And the main generic distinction they have, that they are about Icelanders, and they're not very big. No, not exactly, they are not very short, they're very long. Not very, but around medium. Okay, and another thing, Bjarnar saga Hítdælakappa is one of them, but also it is about poets. So it is called saga about poets. The two poets are Björn and Hítdælakappa, which means that he is a hero of the Dale of the River Hit, and Þórður Kolbeinsson. And the relationship between them are very dramatic. So here's a short outline. Þórður steals the Björn's betrothed, Oddny, while Björn is away in Norway and also Russia and well, other foreign realms to gain honor and fame. And then when they come back to Iceland, some very dramatic events come up, they have a dramatic relationship, and then eventually it results in Björn's death, Þórdur's remorse, and Oddny's depression and grief. And here you see somebody made pictures of them in 18th century manuscript. And then, well, this is a very short retelling I did here, but it is enough to notice the two-phase structure of the saga. The action in Norway and action in Iceland. The closer look allows one to see that these two phases are also done in a different way, and my predecessors also noticed it. So the first thing that they noticed is that the narrative is done differently from the point of view of coherence. So people would say, especially in 60s, with the rise of structural studies, it has been pointed out that the part dealing with the action in Norway is more tight. It's like very smooth, very tight and logical, cause and effect connections, everything there. But then when we go to Iceland, everything starts to be loose. Episodes just, like, they're not falling apart, but it's like a big pile of events that just structurally similar, but it's not the same as the Norwegian part. So people would say that the saga is a clumsy compilation. Just a clumsy compilation of some different anecdotes, maybe. Later, the attitude towards saga narrative in general changed, and people started to say that maybe Icelandic past narrative represents a different logical construction of the saga, a different logical construction. So maybe it's not as clumsy, but it's just some different mind behind it. Another thing is character's behavior. So Bjorn, the main protagonist, the main hero of the narration part, victorious Viking, very gracious, he starts to be when he comes back to Iceland, he starts to be a petty farmer, really different and very violent one. Another thing that I found in my email thesis that there is one pattern, a plot pattern that lies in the basis of the two parts. So same kind of events happen in the first part and then in the second part, and this is important. For the whole idea. And the last thing is point of view. And also, I looked at it in my email research. This is a little bit not as solid as I think, but still, I made some graphs here, as you can see. So the first thing that we see that in the first part, the narrator's presence is more, it's not prevailing, but it's more here. It's a red line. And in the second part, the blue line, the character's point of view starts to be more present. But another thing is even more important. So the main villain of the first part is Thordur Kolbeinsson. He steals the woman, and he never has any point of view whatsoever. But in the second part, and here is his point of view, it's red, it's always there in every single chapter, and it even prevails. And there's almost no Thordur in the beginning. So the parts are different from literary point of view. Last but not the least, the whole deal is aggravated by the manuscript kind of situation, because the Norwegian part existed in separate form. The first 10 chapters till here, they existed as a part of a completely different genre, a king saga. It has been a part of legendary saga of Saint Olaf in the manuscript of 15th century Boyarbok of Old Icelandic. Well, it was very tentative for me to think that the first part just was separate text and then everything else was just added to it. And then I would use Stylo and see that they're different and they're two different authors. But there's no way to jump to such fast assumptions, because the first and last chapters in this manuscript, they have indications from the compiler that he used the whole saga. So before 15th century, there was a whole saga with the first part and the second part together. So we don't know for sure who and how compiled them. Well, the next step for me was to try to understand the cause of the difference. Why the Norwegian part is so different from the Icelandic part. And two hypotheses can be suggested. How? I did it?
Avoid to touch this screen.
Okay. So the first hypothesis is that the change is a result of gradual compositional development of the saga. It's a natural thing for the medieval period, especially Iceland, but not only. The variation and rewriting every single manuscript is a new version. So it could happen that a saga existed in maybe shorter version, and then some parts of it were added later while rewriting. So maybe we are dealing with two or more authors here. The second hypothesis can be that the change is caused by different pragmatics of the parts, the features of different genres. What do I mean here? So, for example, we have one compiler who just is very sensitive to the tradition of Icelandic narrative. It's the tradition of what is the introduction in Icelandic narrative and what is the main part. And for example, it is the usual thing for introduction and for main part to have this difference in point of view. In introductions, we usually don't have a lot of point of view of characters. We have mostly the narrator because he tells the story. But then in the main narrative, we have all of this kind of weird coherence of the episodes, and we don't have we don't have a lot of narrator there. So it could be that this is pragmatics. Or the genre. We also know from many other sagas that when we are dealing with a story in Norway, a story in Iceland, it is different. So maybe it's one compiler who is very sensitive. We don't know. And here I decided to try digital stylometry, Stylo. A tool for stylometrical analysis, created mainly for authorship attribution law. And I will skip the intro part for Stylo, as this is the kingdom of Stylo here, and get straight to my struggles. Yes. So the question was as follows: Stylo can detect similarities of style of different authors when the authors are known. But could Stylo and the counting of most frequent words help me with the field totally anonymous, when there is no authors whatsoever? Well, we have only one author, Snorri Sturluson of Heimskringla there, and Snorri's Ed, of course, but at the same time, he's the only one, and we don't know for sure about him too. So, no authors. In other words, the idea was not to find an author for different parts of Bjarnar saga, but to have statistical evidence for the difference. And also maybe to get some hints of what was the cause. So I made 3 types of style analysis. First, I tried the cluster analysis. And the Bjarnar saga was cut in 2 parts, according to previous literary research, to my hypothesis about it, and not only mine. And then it was set against other sagas of different genres. There's sagas of poets, and sagas of Icelanders, king saga, legendary saga, just to make a lot. And here you see that they do not cluster together. I was happy about it. Yes, they do not cluster together. And another very interesting thing, that the first part, the Norwegian part, clusters together with other poet sagas, Cormac saga, Hallfreðr saga, and Lundberg saga, while the second part doesn't cluster with them. And this is an interesting result, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. So I also wasn't sure if this is actually accurate enough. So I decided to try another kind of analysis. Oh, it's another picture. So this is what Professor Rybitsky helped me with. And here you can see almost the same type of analysis, but the quality of the connection is. You still see that they are not clustered together, and they don't have as big connection as with other sagas. So I decided to try a rolling classifier because I wanted to see the difference on the whole length of the saga. If we could see that, okay, here is a different one author and there's another author. But well, rolling classifier was created for cases when we actually know the examples from authors and they could kind of cluster together. Well, I decided, well, maybe I could take a small sample from the first part and then take a small sample from the second part and then see what happens. And of course, I got a very beautiful result, you see. It's like the first part break almost at the point where I would expect it. And then the second part also very solid, also where I expected it. And I had 5 sagas here for the comparison, short sample from first part, short sample from second part, and the whole Bjarnar saga. And I went with that to Helsinki Nordic conference. And everybody was happy about it. Yes, everything worked. And then I started to think, well, maybe it's not right, actually. And I went here and talked to Jan, and he said, well, yeah, it's probably cheating, because you take a part from the first part and part from the second part, and they perfectly cluster together. But, well, what happens if we don't put any sample there? And when we made it with Jan, it didn't work, because I had different corpus. So now I decided to do the same thing without samples from Bjarnar saga, but I took, for the corpora, I took sagas that were really close, that Stylo showed me that something is close here. So from this cluster analysis. So here I took all of the sagas of poets, and King saga that was close, Morkinskinna, and Laxdæla too, because it also was close. And here you see that there is also a split. And well, the second part is not as solid as it was before, but there is a split between the first part, which is solid, and the second part. And well, there are no samples from Bjarnar saga. And here, this made me happy. Yes, that's true. But it's also interesting that my version of Stylo is a little buggy. You don't see here the names of the sagas. So I just assume which color what saga is. So I took out Morkinskin, which is a king saga, and I got the second result, which is figure 4. And still, the first part is more or less solid, a little bit more noisy. But still there is something. Well, maybe you will tell me if this result is good or not. I'm not sure of that. So maybe we could say that this works with specific corpus, and corpus is important here. While we are talking about anonymous texts. Okay, so what next? Next, I was thinking, well, maybe this is also not enough. Could I look at it through consensus tree? Oh no, not yet. So this is the same thing, but with 1,000 most frequent words, and you see that this is even better. Almost no noise here. So consensus tree. I put here only Bjarnar saga, and this is perfect because when we take Bjarnar saga with sampling on 1,000 words, it shows this clear split between the first part and the second part, because the first part is 5,823 words, and here's 6,000 words here. So they split very beautifully. And another example is on 2,500 words. Okay, so maybe the only thing for sure that we can say that there are two parts in Bjarnar saga and they are different. And Stylo shows it too. But could it give us also ideas on what is going on here? Or why it happens like that? Well, according to graphs, it very well could be that the parts were written by different people. Yes. And this is what we would expect from Stylo analysis, usually. But however, as we're dealing with Icelandic saga field, which has very strong narrative tradition. It has very strong oral narrative tradition. Then oral narrative went into the written narrative, and we know many examples when scribes feel kind of that this is from this saga and this should be in this saga. So it could be also that it's not two different people, but kind of genre maybe is talking to us. So I decided to leave the idea about the two authors of Bjarnar saga Hítdælakappa a little bit aside for a moment, and to think about genre. And this part is most under construction part here, so I'm sorry for that. So I have decided to look again at the result of the cluster analysis that showed that the Norwegian part clusters with sagas of poets when the Icelandic part does not. In this case, Bjarnar saga 1 with poets, and Bjarnar saga 2 with everything else, which is Icelandic sagas like Gisla saga, Laxdale, you can see it here, but it's here. Njál saga, they're all sagas of Icelanders. Yes. Could it suggest that the narrative of the Norwegian part is really closer to other sagas of poets? Without too deep close reading, I haven't done it yet. But for me it seemed that these sagas of poets are more coherent. They're really tight and smooth. They have their exposition, climax, everything just logical there. And they don't have all of these illogical things that are in the second part of the Icelandic. And so it would be really interesting to proceed with the discourse analysis of the whole sagas of poets set, and to compare the Norwegian part narrative to them, and to see, like, to try to measure it. And I would really appreciate any feedback on technology that could help me with that. Yes, so it would be nice to measure the quality of coherence here. And coherence is very important from the point of view of vocabulary that Stylo looks at, because the coherence is done through the use of pronouns, of repetitions, of conjunctions, and all that. The vocabulary is also important from the thematic point of view, because, well, Norwegian part and this sagas of poets, especially Hallfreðr saga and Hunlok saga, they mostly set in Norway. And Norwegian narrative is about a king and about something that happens, some adventures and Vikings. So vocabulary could be the same, and this is also worth checking. However, this is only cluster analysis. What happens if we take samples and go with different amounts of most frequent words? So what will happen if we use consensus tree? And the results are different with different corpora. On figure 8, you see all of the Íslendingasögur corpora here. And maybe it's just too much for it. Well, Bjarnar saga still do not, so it's not, you cannot see it from here because of the picture, but the first part of Bjarnar saga is here, and the second part of Bjarnar saga is here, so they still do not cluster together. But they do not cluster with sagas of poets too. It's just a whole mix of everything. Maybe too many styles for Stylo, and I just can't do it. But, and also a lot of words. But when we look at figure 9, here it's much lesser corpus, the same corpus as I used in cluster analysis. And here, all of the poet sagas cluster together. And also Bjarnar saga clusters together too. Yes, so in this figure, Stylo sees it, that this is a particular genre, sagas of poets. And then the next thing is, what happens if we look only at sagas of poets? And I also added Egil saga. It's very long, but it's also associated with sagas of poets, because Egil was a poet, yes, but this is a little bit more complicated. And here you see that Bjarnar saga again, it splits. So, and the first part clusters together with Hallfredo and Gunnlaug, as previously. And this is very interesting result for me, as I'm not sure what it means. It really needs to be checked. So among sagas of poets, 2 parts of Bjarnar saga do not cluster together. It's one result. The second part is that this Norwegian narrative clusters with Norway narratives and with tighter narratives. Okay. So finally, the last question. The last question that I wanted to discuss today with you and to show to you is I looked at the very bipartite structure, so this 2-part structure. Is it an individual feature of Bjarnar saga Hítdælakappa, or it's a usual thing for sagas in general? Well, I looked at only sagas of poets so far, and if we look at, so this is Hallfredo saga, Gunnlaug saga, and Kormuk saga. You see here there is no actually bipartite structure here. Even if it would have introduction, main narrative, it probably would show up if it is the case with Bjarnar saga, but it's not here. Although, however, if we look at Egil saga, this is the case here. Yes, there is 2 different parts there. And what is more interesting, so I've seen this picture and I was like, okay, maybe people wrote something about it, and yes, they wrote. And actually, somewhere here, there is a split they find. Because here, the first generation story ends, and then Egil kind of comes up, and he becomes the main protagonist, and he is in the very center of the scene. So Stylo can find that. And with Egil saga, people usually do not talk about different authorship. Many researchers before me would say that this is one author who is very kind of very smart, and he knows how to deal with the narrative, but he has 2 different narratives. So this is something to work on probably in the future. Yes, and now I finally proceed to the conclusions, I guess. So the first thing is the bipartite structure of Bjarnar saga is recognized by Stylo. That's good. And however, the results are sensitive to the corpus, and this is important. So we need to be very, we need to know what kind of corpora to choose here. Maybe this can a little bit create some noise in some noise in the results. The second thing is that Norwegian part of Bjarnar saga is closer to other sagas of poets, and this is something about genre. And so my question is, what it can tell us about the genre of sagas of poets in whole. So the next step for me would be to compare Norwegian part and sagas of poets from the point of view of discourse, of the coherence, how periods and sentences are connected together, what is the logic of the narrative, and to see from this point of view what happens. And also the very interesting result is about English saga. So there are cases with repetition that are recognized by Stylo, and I'm not entirely sure what it means. Maybe it doesn't mean that Bjarnar saga actually was made by two people. Maybe it is a thing about genre pragmatics. Yes, so I would really love some discussion and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, you, sir, and Jan, do you have any questions for our guest?
I can start. Thank you. It was very interesting, and I love that you put attention to this issue that with the texts that are originally oral and with this oral tradition, there is this problem of when the story becomes written down, perhaps something gets lost. And I wonder whether with Icelandic sagas you have this situation that you have many versions of the same saga written down, and if so, how do you learn them which version to examine, or which parts actually to include, and whether there is like one version that you can agree on, or
Okay, you just nailed down the main question of the whole Icelandic philology, I guess.
Okay.
Like everybody's talking about it. Of course, there are many. As I think in any medieval case, you have many versions, and especially with sagas of fantasy, yes, people broke a lot of source, like which is from oral part, which is from written part. Nobody knows for sure. Like I believe myself that there is a combination of oral and written. What we have is just this oral written narrative, which we should analyze. And of that, we also have many copies. And in the 13th century, 15th century, and the 18th century, and they proceeded to copy even in the 20th century. So in all of its time, they would add something. And so every single manuscript is something on its own. That's why, for example, this case of Norwegian part existing in 15th century manuscript in Boyer book is interesting. It's the only manuscript that contains it. And yeah, so for scribe in 15th century, he felt that this part is generically kind of appropriate for all of saga. But everybody else decided that no, actually no. Yeah, what it says, it's interesting.
So if I understand correctly, some people actually excluded the Norwegian part of the saga.
Yeah. So other copies of all of saga in saga, they do not have the Norwegian part. Yeah, and this is interesting. I started to think about it only a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, because well, this is about preferences probably, and maybe it's something about 15th century.
Mm-hmm. Could it also be assigned, for example, that perhaps this part was later added by a narrator of the story, that actually the two narrators that you're looking for, that one of them lived before, and let's say 100 years later somebody decided that, well, this story needs further elaboration, I'm gonna add it, and perhaps this could be the trace of that.
This is maybe I did not understand correctly. Yeah, so
for example, the first part of the story was created earlier than the second part of the story, and based on well, if you're considering two authors, do you think there is also a chance that they might come originally from different periods of time as well?
Could be, yes. And maybe what is interesting here that the first part classes with other sagas of poets could be that maybe it is even not earlier but later, or other way around. So yeah, but because this for me it shows that there is some genre there, and so when the sagas of poets were created, they were felt as some one genre, and the first part is from this, but the second part is from something else, and this is more disjoint. It has more kind of anecdotal structures, so maybe this was something from oral. But it could be that in written form, the first part existed. So it was the first that was in written form, but the second part existed as oral, and then was written down afterwards. So, and it came up just right now, so I'm not sure. Yeah. It is extremely interesting, yes, and it would be really nice to compare more, to see with other cases, not with this saga, because I worked in the field of sagas of poets mostly. But as you see with Egil's saga, for example, it's almost the same kind of case. Maybe it could be nice to see what is this there.
I have a question. Is this saga in verse or in prose?
In prose and in verse, so it's
Okay.
prosametrum. Yes.
Prosametrum. So that's the case of this elder Edda, where there are some parts which were versified
Yes,
and
yes,
some
yeah.
parts in prose, with the assumption that the versified parts were older, right?
Yes.
So, is it possible that this distinction between prose and verse and the proportion of prose and verse in either of the parts may have some impact on the signal, so that in fact the verse prose thing is detected rather than
It could be.
Iceland Norway parts? Just ask.
Yeah, it also, yeah, maybe, because the vocabulary of verses is different.
You have to stretch your style. You have to fit it into the verse structure, right?
Yes. So this also could be the case. I mean, I don't think about it. Well, in the first part there are 2 verses actually, but they're not as big, not as many as in the second part. But the second part also the main. So maybe I could show it. Maybe here. So the main verse part comes here. Here almost no verses, and here also almost no verses. So I think that maybe it would, if this is the case, so maybe here would be something different. Maybe it had 3-part structure, not 2. So I think this is important.
Yeah, because you use some tools that are aligned to a gradual development of the signal, right? They just decide in a binary manner how to make distinctions. Such as the one here.
The gradual would be the best, and that's why I was thinking about Roman classifier. Because I was thinking maybe it would just show the like. But for me, the best graph would be to see, okay, in this chapter is like this, and this chapter is like this. So because every single chapter could be added, and we're not sure what chapter is for them, and what sentence is for them even. So because I think that they were thinking like bigger than sentence. The chapter could be like this is episode, and this episode also an anecdote, and I heard this anecdote somewhere and just put it here. So it would be nice to see also this, like every single chapter is it different or not. But with anonymous texts, it's probably impossible to do with Stylo. But it's really nice to see the gradual.
But there's another assumption in oral literature that is retelling the story from the past. That the oldest episodes are sort of taken directly from the oral tradition, right? And the sort of contemporary parts are made up by the singer, writer, or whoever she was, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this structure, you might find more formulaic expressions or formulaic language in those parts telling about the distant past, rather than the contemporary times.
Yeah.
So again, there will be a gradual development of sound.
Yeah. The problem here is that this would be the case, I think, with primary chronicle, with Russian Tale of the Bygone Years, because you have this retrospective part of the distant past, and then you have contemporary, and there you have this kind of smooth and tight narrative a little bit, not so much, but still, and then a lot of new things. But here, the first part, well, the second part, it's all so dramatic. I wouldn't say that the first part of Bjarnar saga Hítdælakappa is about distant past. So it could be that this is a tradition also. So this is how you make. They kind of think, okay, this is what was in the beginning, and that's how I make the story about the beginning. It doesn't matter if it happened in the past or it's even if it's in the future, but this is the beginning and this is how I make it, and this is why it's like that. Yeah.
And what about the vocabulary? Is one of the parts using more archaic vocabulary than the other, or
Yeah, when we're looking at Brazil, yeah, we've seen that, for example, yeah, if we look at the meaningful vocabulary, they are different, yes. For example, because in the Norwegian part they're more the king, so you have konungur there, and you don't have konungur in the second part because there's no king. So in this meaningful vocabulary, they are different. But I'm not sure if this is the main. Maybe this is a question to you. If this is the main kind of thing that distinguishes them.
because the follow-up question would be is there any differences in spelling? Because in the case of the Icelandic language, you have to take this into account. Right?
Yes,
so
yes,
you would
and
usually modernize or do something.
Yes.
I don't really know what it is, but
Yeah,
there's some steps to be undertaken.
yeah, for my corpus, I took everything in normalized spelling, so they don't have differences. It was important. Also, this corpus was prepared before me in the institute, so they have all sagas of Icelanders in one corpus. I took it and used it. So at least this discrepancy is not there. I hope so. But with vocabulary, yes, definitely. And I think this is what. So this vocabulary is in the basis of thematic difference. So the main theme of the first part is more about Norway and has this particular vocabulary. It should be maybe, but I didn't look at it yet so much, so maybe it would be interesting to do.
I don't want to overwhelm the discussion, but if I may to follow up.
Yes, you may.
What about doing an additional experiment in which you would just eliminate or neutralize the words that might have affected the content? So the vocabulary related to the kings, to the journeys, to the travelers, and so on and so on, to see if after having them neutralized, you still see this transition from one word to another.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make the task more difficult for a computer,
Okay.
if it still can recognize the two voices.
So to make it without a theme, for example,
Yeah.
yes, just
Yeah.
yeah, and this would mean that they are probably written by different people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different traditions, different people.
Mm-hmm.
You can never say about people, but this is the very same situation as in the Homeric question and the Odyssey and the Iliad. Is it people or just traditions they come from? Hard to say, right?
Yeah, especially in this oral kind of culture, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
And I came late, but I've heard this before. Actually, I still remember because it was fairly recently. And it would be interesting to take Maciej's advice about getting rid of the thematic words, and then limit the most frequent word list to, say, 100, which you probably did anyway, and see whether you'll get any differences there, which will give us the additional methodological information whether, we might be getting rid of king, but we might not be getting rid of the function words that come with king. Okay, that's complicating things even more than me, but I'd like to see the results.
Okay, yes.
Actually, any of those new fabulous, unofficial, undescribed new functions of Stylo could be
course.
Yeah, I mean
That's
the
what the
zero
zeros are meant to.
Yeah. Because that's, I mean, we have a new, he has written a new version of Stylo now.
Okay.
It's still unofficial, and it has some pretty nice stuff there. Including cosine delta.
Yeah, but that's a different topic. So, if I came back to this rolling classified pictures of cures, which were very good, yeah, these ones.
This is different from what I showed you. This is without samples, and this has.
That's absolutely fantastic. I would say methodologically that's a step forward. But what did you put into the training set? The titles will say nothing to us, but what kind of genres?
Yeah, so I had all of the sagas of poets, so the closest to Bjarnar saga. I had Laxdala and Gisla, who are from just sagas of Icelanders, a little bit different than sagas of poets because they have less of poetry there. And I also had Markinskine, which is King's Saga, and that's all. So I had King's Saga, Sagas of Icelanders, and Sagas of Poets. And well, I think that it assigns colors as the
Yeah, the
text.
progression of
Yeah.
color.
So I think gray is Markinskine, and this is a King's Saga. And this is all about Norway and kings. So, and this is in the Norwegian part.
Okay, again a question, just another question, because it seems to be, as I said, a step forward, methodologically speaking. Now, what about getting rid of this gray?
Yeah, and this is a figure number 4 without gray. Yeah.
What about getting rid of the black, and so on and so on?
And so on. Yeah.
As long as you don't see any partition anymore, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, actually I didn't do it because this I did in the bus yesterday, so I haven't time to proceed. But yeah, maybe because when we did it with different corpus with Jan in April, and the corpus was not it didn't contain sagas of poets. It had Morkinskine, but it mostly had other sagas. And everything was mixed up, it was complete noise, everything, and we were like, okay, it doesn't work. So corpus is important here, and this is, I'm not entirely sure what this means.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of time left to discuss the details of it.
Perhaps naive question, but what you did, I think, proved that we have to do these 2 different works. Or you still remain, it is the one whole work.
Well, I'm not sure entirely. Yes, because it could be different, if it's different pragmatics, for example, then it still could be one. Because one, for me, pragmatics means that, for example, if you talk about Norway, then you need to do it in this particular style. And if you talk about Iceland, you need to do it in this particular style. There still can be one person to do that, one Homer or one.
Another question was a little bit surprising for me, that you said about relating with strong presence of narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, if I well understood.
Yes, yeah.
Especially in this first part,
Mm-hmm.
this Norwegian
Yeah.
part. But what is the manifestation of his presence? In what person he, in plural or singular person, he usually talks and so on? What are the manifestations of his presence?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because this was exactly what my master's thesis was about. So what I recognized is that there are more explanations in the first part. The first part, somebody would say, this happened because fiat of this, and there are more markers of that. Well, he never talks in first person.
No singular.
Not like I, like this. But there are many, something like explanations why something happened, or some epithets that he was good and he was bad or something. This comes from someone, right? And this comes from someone I would assign a narrator. So this is not an author, but narrator. And this is important. But in the second part, there are much less of the explanations. And if we go to the graph I made here, it's not very big, but still, here it's kind of more often, the explanations. They are still there, but like one at a time, maybe not more. But he starts to use more often the point of view of a character. So we see what happens from the point of, like what I did there, I counted their verbs of perception, the verba sentiendi. So in the second part, verba sentiendi are more present than in the first part, and this was for me the result. And also, yeah, the people who have point of view also different.
Do you admit such possibility that in fact there is no narrator in it? I mean, this kind of literature is composed rather from the blocks deriving from oral transmission. And this kind of literature, I mean, we are in 10th century, yes?
Well, in 10th century, in the so everything happens in 10th, 11th century,
yes.
but it probably was composed in 13th century. It was written down.
Okay.
13.
Can we prove that there are really written sources for author of this saga? The first question, but these kind of sagas, I think, are rather join rather the blocks of oral culture, and it is possible that they have no narrator at all. I mean, these observation commentaries could have entered the work with this block to which they belonged previously. Is it possible?
To the block
Of oral narration which was introduced to the work. You know, is if one would say heritage with this oral transmission, also these kind of remarks.
yes.
What you identify with narrator. Because
So we would say that we have two different oral traditions. The first tradition about Norway with the remarks, and the second part without remarks.
Or we have seen quite a lot of manuscripts, Latin manuscripts, in the case of which those monks or scribes were they had a need to add some interpolations or to explain to the reader the things that were not in the original text, right? And by comparing those manuscripts, we can get rid of them. But still, there are somewhere in some of the manuscripts that they simply are there, right? So is it possible that one of the manuscript traditions affected this narratorial remarks?
because there are no personal remarks, I mean, as I remember or something like that. No personal.
There is no author in our like how we see it. I also, well, maybe that's why I use narrator but not the author here, because I think even in oral narrative we usually get the narrative. It's like when you tell the story, you are there, and when you connect something that this happened because of that, you are there, and this is your subjectivity there. So this is why this is kind of important for me, was just to get rid of author whatsoever, because I don't know, because maybe there are 50 authors there, and everything. But it is interesting that in the first part, for example, maybe these 15 people feel that it's appropriate to connect things together and to say that this happened because of that. And the second part, they just don't feel like that.
But what in fact unifies?
Yes,
what unifies these?
And another thing which is important here, and why Icelandic sagas are interesting here, and so in Russia there is one specialist called Anton Zimmerman, and he called it as early written texts, not the pисьменные texts. So it's a compilation of oral tradition and written tradition. And written tradition comes with a different perception of text, different perception of narrative, and also with different perception of how you tell the story. And here we get narrative strategy. So the first part and second part, they are connected, not only by the same people who are there, but also a lot of motives that go through both parts. And many things in the second part, they happen because of the first part. So they are kind of very, not super neatly, but still they are tied together. And this is what I also research, how exactly this happens. Because it is possible that the first part was also kind of, because we also have a very short, short anecdote about Björn and King Olaf, which is probably was in the very basis of the first part. So somebody just knew that Björn was at the court, and he got some presents from the king, and then the whole story happened around it. But for me, it's not so important to know what was the first, but to see, okay, I have this first part, and in this particular form, and what can I do with it? Like, what is that? Maybe it was tied together in the written period, and it could be nice to know how the narrator in the written period in Iceland in 13th century creates this kind of narrative. Yeah.
Okay, so I can consider we are done for today. So thank you very much. And see you later, alligator.
What do you mean by that?
There's no set date.
In the water or?
Maybe in the mother, because why not?